Hey dudes, it's Lerald. Pyroclast Mine Saboteur is a build that got a nice buff in patch 3.27. It's a real hipster throwback build too, it's got that cool factor of being off meta, but don't be fooled. This build absolutely cooks bosses on a league start budget. You can easily zoom through the campaign and pinnacle bosses, and once you get some decent uniques and amp up the build's budget by a little bit, you're going to be just sending bosses to the Shadow Realm. Basically, this build's the polar opposite of Toxic Rain. It's got great single target damage, but the map clear is kinda mid. It's not bad. It's just the standard stop and start playstyle you get out of any build that uses shield charge to get around. It's a Saboteur, which is kind of an underrated Ascendancy now, and more importantly, it is a Shadow. So you can use this build to get your Void Stones and farm some currency by, bossing over the first weekend of the league, and then swap over to whatever assassin build winds up being the meta. As we mentioned in our last couple of videos, we are now working with PoE Vault to bring you written guides for our PoE 1 and PoE 2 builds, and these guides will pair with our video content and offer the same level of care and consideration that we give to everything we do. You can find the POB in that written guide, linked in the description. We've been streaming here and on Twitch at Lerald Live, so check it out. Join our Discord as well, we've got a really awesome community, you should come be part of it. Okay, let's start with the absolute basic of the build, and make sure D&D mode is on, and just show off how Pyroclast Mine works, and specifically talk about how it works in conjunction with the change that's being made in this patch, and why it's a buff to Pyroclast Mine, but a nerf to most of the builds that used Pyroclast Mine. That might sound a little confusing, but it'll make sense, I promise. So Pyroclast Mine, it's a mine. You throw it down, press detonate mines, and it explodes. So we can fix this by just running a 2-link, right? Automation, link to detonate mines. This is super simple. You can buy detonate mines once you unlock the library. Very basic. There are some other ways to automate mine exploding, so you only have to do this actual self-cast it and then press detonate mines for the first 18 levels or so, and then from there you can basically just have it be automated for the rest of the lifespan of the character if you want. But there is a reason to want to manually detonate mines when you fight bosses, and that's because of the way that Pyroclast Mine works. So the way it works right now is that it fires an additional projectile for every mine, or every 4 mines in the detonation sequence. This is being changed in the coming patch to every 3 mines. And then currently it has this really insane bonus of adding a bunch of flat fire damage to hits against enemies based on the number of mines that are on the ground. So the issue with this is that it basically makes Pyroclast Mines into a very valuable support skill, but not to actually use as a mine. And the reason is, when you detonate mines, they blow up, right? So that means that they're not going to be there anymore and not be providing that flat damage to the rest of the mines in the chain. So functionally, the best way to use Pyroclast Mines prior to the patch was to put a bunch of them down and then do something else. Maybe you're being a support for somebody, or maybe you're using another skill and you're just using this to add a bunch of flat damage. This all was dumb, right? So the way that they are now going to work, if we could jump over here to the patch notes, is instead Pyroclast Mine is going to add an exposure, a fire exposure modifier onto enemies that by default gives 15% fire res as a penalty to enemies, and it's scalable with aura effect, but it doesn't scale with the number of mines that are active. This is actually a good thing, even though it seems like it's a bad thing. This is a good thing. So you could set 20 mines down, you'd have this massive flat fire damage on enemies, but then as soon as you press detonate, the mines are going away, and now that buff is going away as you're getting all of these projectiles where you would want them to be buffed up more. The flat bonus is gone. That's not going to be the case now. You're going to get that same fire res penalty on enemies the whole time. Additionally, the base damage is just being increased by 35%, and it's also getting a buff of requiring only 3 prior mines for an additional projectile instead of 4, so you're getting significantly more projectiles. So projectiles are how this does damage, right? It is effectively just a spell, but because it's a mine, you're able to scale it by both using things like spell damage and spell crit chance and so on, but also crit chance with mines and mine throwing speed. And so this is the way that you would want to set up to blast a boss, right? You turn off automation so that the mines aren't exploding the moment that you throw them down, because automation doesn't work in the hideout. I could simulate that by just holding down my detonate mines keybind, and you can see anytime you're zipping around throwing mines, they're blowing up immediately. So if you turn off automation and let the blast change finish, they will stop blowing up. And then, as the boss is about to spawn, you press the button 1 time, and the chain will start, and then any mines that you throw out while the chain is still going will be added into the chain. So you can get upwards of 30, 40 mines at a time in a single chain. If we can get that chain to go off here, and again, show it off, you can see the insane amount of projectiles that are happening at the end of the chain. Whereas if we'll simulate automation support being on or automation being on and just automatically triggering detonate mines, we're never getting more than about 5 or 6 mines exploding at a time if we're just automating them exploding. And so this is the way that we're able to get massive amounts of boss damage. We turn off automation, queue up a bunch of mines before the boss is attackable, then press the detonate mine keybind that we have one time, just once, and get that full combo, throw out as many mines as you can while also dodging mechanics as needed, and then you can turn automation back on and just go back to the usual approach of just, moving around, throwing mines, dodging, throwing mines, pretty basic. And it basically just turns into any old spell damage build, except that all of the aiming and so on is automated for you. Now, as I said before, this is a 15% fire res penalty that you're going to get out of Pyroclast Mine, and that obviously sounds bad compared to a massive amount of flat damage, but it scales with the effect of auras that are granted by your mines, and by playing a Saboteur, we're able to get 150% increased effective auras from mines. We're also able to get about 30% from one of the mine masteries that we take right here, 30% increased effective auras from mines. This has a pretty huge amount of resistance penalty. We can also take this bonus from the elemental wheel here, elemental mastery, that bumps that up to 18%, and then by multiplying that by 180% increase, we're going from an 18% increase times 2.8 is 50. So we're cutting 50 elemental res from any enemies that we're fighting at all, as long as we have any mines near them. And as you can see, that's a pretty substantial damage increase. On top of the fact that they're also just giving 35% more damage to the skill and increasing the effectiveness of added damage, although getting flat added fire damage is relatively uncommon. It's basically only available on weapon prefixes, pretty normally, and generally you would rather have +2 skill gem levels and then increase spell damage, since it is a spell, but it's a thing you can use early on in gearing. And now it'll be even a little bit better than it was. And certainly the amount of damage that you're going to deal when you're zipping around through maps and just throwing down, just one set of mines and not stacking them up, that damage is going to be way up compared to where it was before. Over 35% more. Okay, so with that being said, let's take a look at the PoB. Now, we'll include the disclaimer here that we are doing this before PoB has been updated. This is not Local Identity's fault. This is just the fact that GGG hasn't updated the JSON or whatever, so none of the stuff in the tree will be changed at all. All of the tree loadouts will be the same. All of the skills will also be the same, and the supports and all the recommended gear will all be the same. But the functionality of Pyroclast Mine will change a little bit once PoB is updated. So, right now I'm just using this custom modifier here, but you can just put, as I have in the saved version of it, you can just put a hash in front of it to make it be, red out, and then it's not working. But that's how we've basically approximated how much damage we're actually getting out of this setup. Alright, so like I said, we have a PoB here, and this is just basically a PoB that takes you all the way through the campaign. We start out with the standard Shadow start, go through the top here, and pick up some mine nodes. Around level 18 or so, you're able to get this mine mastery that makes it so that detonate mines is triggered while you're moving, which is great quality of life. This makes it so that you no longer have to play that 2-button playstyle, and you can keep this active until you do the library, and you're able to get detonate mines as a skill gem, I suppose, and then link that to automation, and then you never have to think about detonating mines again until you're doing pinnacle bosses where you're wanting to front load a bunch of them up and do that by hand. As you continue progressing, there's just some really powerful stuff that you could pick up along the way to get more damage, things like devastating devices and explosive elements. You are also able to pick up some good defensive bonuses along the way too, like Written in Blood, and then the tree just kind of progresses from there. The one downside of using mines is that you do have to have a fair amount of unreserved mana, so you can use Clarity during the campaign to help with mana, but mines reserve mana when you throw them down, as you can see. They're eating my mana up, and they don't regen the mana automatically. When they expire, you do have to actually regen that, and so Clarity helps. Clarity or a bit of mana regen somewhere in the tree, but Anything you can do to give yourself more mana reservation efficiency, like this mana mastery or the influence wheel, or eventually the charisma wheel down here, helps with hitting in more auras, which we're going to be basically just using for defensive purposes. The only real offensive aura that we need is Skitterbots. You can do Zealotry or whatever if you really want to go nuts, but that kind of requires a lot more investment. We're also using some charge stacking. That's one really nice thing that mines afford you the ability to do, is basically just get guaranteed frenzy and power charge generation and a ton of power out of them. And so, this is kind of what the tree looks like. It's a good mix of like offense and defense toward the end. You get a lot of suppression nodes along the way, a lot of defensive orientation. And then as we kind of progress into early maps, we're going to do basically the standard thing that you would have done on like a Trickster or really any sort of build in this upper right side of the tree, where you're going to build into a combination of like hybrid defenses, life, energy shield, evasion, ghost dance, and then just try to use all of those layered together to be reasonably tanky, enough to be able to get through maps. We also have like a shield on, and there's some other real benefits as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the Saboteur Ascendancy right now, and the first bonus, Demolition Specialist, is just a huge damage bonus. It gives you this massive amount of elemental resistance shredding out of Pyroclast Mine. And then as you continue, you kind of have two good defensive options. Born in the Shadows, I think, is super underrated. It basically guarantees like everything around you is permanently blinded. You blind enemies on hit, guaranteed. You're also immune to blind, which is actually like pretty useful defensively, because blind is a big accuracy and evasion penalty. And this like gives you a bunch of damage reduction on top of that. So you get a bunch of evasion, or I guess less accuracy rating, but the point is less chance to be hit by enemies. And then you also take less damage from them just straight up. I think Born in the Shadows is a little bit better to take as your second Ascendancy over Pyromaniac, but that would definitely be your third. This gives you up to 10% life regen per second, just based on how many mines you've blown up recently. Although you're going to be blowing up maps with those mines as well. And then it also gives you Ignite and Shock Immune, which isn't like super essential long term, but it is like pretty great utility to have early on. When you're doing the campaign, it's really good. And even when you're pushing up toward bosses, it's definitely like useful to have in that initial run to your Void Stones. Then Bomb Specialist just makes sense as your last Ascendancy node here. It's about 15% more damage. It's a 50%, or it's a 30% chance to do 50% more damage. That's basically 15% more damage. And at the same time, it's a 30% chance to take 50% less damage from area of effect hits. So it's sort of 15% damage, but not exactly. I've taken a look at some of the Bloodline Ascendancies, and I don't really think there's anything that looks super appealing for Saboteur at the moment, but you could definitely, especially once you're like ailment immune, you could consider dropping Pyromaniac and taking something if one of the newly revealed Bloodline Ascendancies makes sense. And then the same goes with Bomb Specialist if there is something out there that's offering like 20 or 30% more damage, and then also a decent defensive bonus. Seems unlikely, but if that's the case, maybe you could take that instead. In any case, I think this is a super underrated Ascendancy here that Saboteur has available. And one little twist that you can do once you're kind of deep into things is, instead of this small passive that gives you the blind effect, not really that useful, you could take this small passive over here for a little bit more mine throwing speed, because mine throwing speed is a very valuable stat and one that you don't really have a lot of access to, so every single bit that you can get is good. Alright, so we had the whole video done and uploaded on YouTube, ready to go, and then GGG very nicely dropped all of the Ascendancy Bloodlines today, kind of in the middle of the afternoon, so that's great news. We got a chance to look at all of them and kind of evaluate them, and there's really only one that stands out as being like a good option for this build, but it is a pretty good option, and unfortunately it's the all Ascendancy, so that does mean you'll have to do Delve in order to unlock this, so that may affect your opinion on whether you want to bother. But it's this right-hand side. There's a small passive that gives 15% increased global defenses, which is fantastic. And then one of the strengths of this build is that it doesn't really need a lot of skill gems. You actually have a very easy time having like a full 4-link just open on your gloves or whatever, and you can use that to get no extra damage taken from critical strikes. Again, trivially easy to do that, and that's really great. So this is probably a bonus that you are going to want to take if you're willing to do Delve in order to get it. It does seem like it is a lot better option than Pyromaniac, at least once you have yourself Ailment Immune, Elemental Ailment Immune, so obviously bear that in mind, and bear in mind the fact that you're going to have to do Delve to unlock it. But it is ultimately worth it, and that is what you should do. Keep Born in the Shadows Demo Spec and Bomb Specialist, and then do some Delve and get Precursors release, and now you're a little bit tankier than you would have been before. Alright, now let's talk about gear. So the gear that you're going to run through the campaign is basically just like literally whatever has the right socket links, and then if it has life and resistances, that's awesome. You know, move speed, that's great, but pretty much you're just looking for like socket links. Once you get into early mapping, kind of just want to get life resistances, and then a hybrid energy shield and evasion is useful too. Your wand is kind of the one thing that you'll maybe want to be like making some effort to kind of make good. You can use the Deafening Essence of Woe on a decent wand to get yourself some spell damage. If you can get a combination of like spell damage and flat fire damage added to spells, that is useful. Ideally, you want a wand. I have one here that I bought off of Faustus that was very bad, slapped with the Deafening Essence of Woe, and then crafted this modifier on it, increase mind throwing speed. That's a great mod. That's something you're going to want to be able to, you're going to want to craft onto your wand if you have a free suffix. But you're pretty much just doing like, you know, increased spell damage. Anything with spell crits going to be helpful as well. And then everything else is mostly just defensive stats. You can use Restless Ward. This is just something we recommend here for like a little bit of extra speed to help with the fact that the build is kind of slow. It is also like a nice bump of evasion rating and energy shield. Restless Ward's a fun piece of gear. Gives you a bunch of movement speed based on the frenzy charge stacking that you're doing. That's really it though, right? It's just like evasion, life, and frenzy charges. You could use plenty of other body armors as well. Kintsugi is okay. I think just a basic rare body armor with evasion and energy shield and resistances might be better than Restless Ward, but you know, this will give you a little bit more zoom. Now, one thing you are going to want to look for is a flammability on hit ring. So mines are a little funky. They do count as on hit for you. So if you're using a flammability on hit ring, like this one, the hits from the mines will apply flammability. It's pretty much that simple, and it's a really good thing to have. It'll give you a bunch of minus fire res on enemies, which is great because you are playing a fire build. Astral Projector is another really useful ring. I can't really demonstrate it in the hideout, but you're able to see it in some of the footage that we've shown already. What it does is it makes it so that Nova spells, which Pyroclast Mine is a Nova spell, cast at the targeted location instead of around quote-unquote you. So basically when you throw down these mines, if there is an enemy nearby, like if I was throwing, you know, if I was trying to kill Gwenin, and I threw the mines over here, if you're on the same screen as the thing you're trying to kill, the mines will auto-target over here, they would all explode over here, they would drop all their projectiles over here. And so basically once you add in Astral Projector, you don't really have to aim anymore. You can just throw the mines kind of wherever. You sort of still want to aim for that aura, that minus fire res aura. That's pretty much it. If you're even halfway close, you're going to hit. That means if an enemy moves, you're going to hit. So that's a really valuable bonus to get out of a ring, and you can basically lock this ring in forever, but you don't have to. It does come with 20% less area of effect and not a ton of great stats. Bit of increased spell damage but like it's very replaceable if you just want to run a really good high stats ring. You can in its place, but this is also something you can just lock in for the lifespan of the character as well. Then as we shift over to a bit more of a like nicer gear setup, most of the pieces stay the same, they just have better stats here, you know, resistances and suppression and stuff, but there are a couple of pieces that are really good that become like options, and those would be the Archon's tools. This is a unique that was added in patch 3.26, and it is not terribly expensive, and it looks like this. It grants dex and int, mana reservation, efficiency of skills, but mainly what it does is it gives you a third skitterbot who scorches enemies, and then it also increases the effect of the non-damaging ailments inflicted by your skitterbots. And then it also gives you trap and mine throwing speed, so it's like super strong for miners, and only miners. It has basically no value for anyone who's not a miner. You can also kind of amp this up with Unbound Ailments attached to your skitterbots. That'll give you like a pretty big increase to the amount of shock and scorch and chill that you're getting out of the skitterbots. So this is just all upside. Definitely, I would recommend going for this belt as quickly as you can, whether you self-farm it or buy it or whatever. This is pretty much a must-have for any sort of mining build. And then the other unique that is just like a really, really desirable piece of gear is Sandstorm Visage. I realize that Assassin's basically gotten a version of this added into their tree, but they don't have some of the other upsides available to them that Saboteur does. And ultimately, I think that the fact that Assassin does have that is probably going to result in this being somewhat of a cheaper unique in the coming league. Not that it's super cheap, it does require running Sanctum, but it should be cheaper than it was before. And what it does is, essentially, it gives you your base crit chance with spells is equal to your main hand weapon. So because of that, what we want is a weapon that has like +2 level of gems, you know, +1 all skill gems and +1 fire skill gems. Ideally still mind throwing speed crafted on the suffix, and then like spell damage, spell crit chance, and then crit chance. And you do want to do this on a base that has a lot of crit chance. Prophecy Wand is the perfect base for that. You can harvest enchant it to have increased crit chance as well. This did get nerfed a little bit, like the base crit chance of a lot of wands was reduced slightly. Not by a huge amount. I think you're still going to be pushing around 12% flat crit with a Prophecy Wand in the coming league, which is obviously an enormous amount of crit. So if you're able to get that, that's going to be huge. Just for like getting your base crit chance to be absolutely massive. And the thing is that prior to that, you know, when you're looking at skills, like you can also run increased crit chance. That also adds I believe it's 2% flat crit chance in addition to a massive amount of increased crit chance. Yeah, here it is. So, you know, that is still an option as your 6th support gem if you aren't able to get that Sandstorm Visage. But getting Sandstorm Visage, getting the base crit increase from like 5.5% or whatever it is, 5.5% all the way up to like 12 is pretty huge for getting yourself up to 100% crit chance. Alright, now I'm just going to briefly touch on skills. So we use Stormblast Mine to level through Acts 1, 2, and 3. Once you kill Gravicius, you unlock Pyroclast Mine. At that point, you could pretty much just switch over to using it, and once you hit level 38, I think sometime in Act 4, you'll get Minefield, and this really changes the game. You go from kind of throwing mines out 1 or 2 at a time to throwing 5 out at a time. And mines just feel so much better after that point. Charge mines is also something you get around then, and they are the reason that you're able to generate tons of charges and also get a bunch of bonuses out of having those Frenzy and Power charges. Trapped mine damage is a super useful support. Increased crit chance and crit strike and crit damage are both just really useful support gems. If you get a 5 link or a 6 link available to you early on in mapping, you'll want to use that. You can use Grace or Purgative Elements as your defensive aura of choice throughout the campaign in the early phases of mapping, but Grace is much better once you get your character really like up and running. This is a very basic build, right? You're using Shield Charge with faster attacks to get around, you're using Automation and Detonate Mines together. You can throw Immortal Call at level 1 in there if you want as well. And then the in-game setup is still pretty much all the same stuff, just with higher level gems. The only thing that really changes is if you are able to get to 100% crit chance, using Elemental Focus or Awakened Elemental Focus can be a pretty big damage increase over increased crit chance supports, or, you know, so it's like if you're crit capped, that's not going to do anything. Other than that, everything pretty much stays the same. There's only one extra thing that you really want to add in, and that would be Sniper's Mark. This is something that you can use during the campaign if you want, although, whatever, I think I just wound up using Elemental Weakness for very, like, basic simplicity. But if you add in Sniper's Mark, it'll add about 20% extra damage to enemies, since all of your hits are projectiles, and Sniper's Mark gives you a massive amount of increased damage taken from projectile hits onto enemies as like a debuff. Is basically a Molar multiplier, and so it's worth it to anoint Whispers of Doom, have that flammability on hit ring still for all purposes. You're shredding enemy fire res, and then Sniper's Mark will just give you a ton of boss damage. So the way that you use this is really simple. You load up all your mines, you know, to blast a boss, and then they spawn, you hit them with a Sniper's Mark, start the detonation chain, just throw down mines, and then there you go. They're Sniper's Marked until they die. They're probably going to die fairly quickly because of how many projectiles you're hitting them with. Then optionally, you can do Stone Golem. You can self-cast it, or you can cast some damage taken and use like Life Tap to make it like easier to, you know, not have to actually cast it. Not mandatory, but just something you can do. The same goes with Flesh and Stone. It's just a bit of extra damage reduction, like up to 20% less damage taken from enemies that are near you. You know, with Born in the Shadows giving you an incentive to stand near enemies anyway, I think that, like, that really synergizes nicely with Flesh and Stone, just giving you a bunch of damage reduction as long as you're in Sand Stance, which that's what you're going to do. All right, now let's talk a little bit about some of the new stuff that's coming in the next league, the grafts. So we've gotten to see a few of them. This one is really the only one that I think kind of stands out as being like particularly good for this build, and that is this Molten Soft graft that gives you Heart of Flame, basically this souped up version of Molten Shell. It's just a huge defensive buff, right? So obviously this would be useful if you're trying to stay alive on any build, and I think generally speaking you are probably going to want to lean more toward graft bonuses that would be more defensive just because you have so much built-in damage, but like this bonus, it requires using offering skills, so it's obviously not going to work for this build. But if there are other bonuses that maybe help with increasing damage on enemies, those could be useful. So I think that's something to kind of keep an eye out for as you're looking at grafts. But honestly, I could see going double defensive grafts too, just because being tanky is like kind of more of a premium for this build. It does so much damage. All right, that's pretty much everything. Now let's just hit on the Pantheon and the Bandits. So you can do whatever Pantheon you like. Soul of Shikari is kind of a good one. And then Soul of Lunaris is definitely the best option for your major. Pantheon wants your ailment immune, but prior to that point, you're going to want to run Soul of the Bride King, especially with the fact that you are Ignite and Shock immune already. Getting like Freeze immune and mostly Chill immune out of Soul of the Bride King is huge. You really don't need to get Elemental Ailment immunity for a while with the build, but you will once you get Archon's tools. You know, you don't want to be running around being scorched all the time, so having that is definitely important eventually, and at that point you're going to want to drop Soul of the Bride King and go to Soul of Lunaris. So as for Pantheons, you are going to zoom through the campaign. Taking Illyria is definitely the move in the campaign, and then once you're deep into maps, you can swap back over to the 1 extra point. That's definitely the correct approach to take. Alright, that's Pyroclast Mine Saboteur. It is a really good bosser. It is a super easy build to play. You throw the mines, everything dies. Easy peasy. You can play it to Uber bosses and tier 17s if you want, or if you just want to get your Void Stones, swap to Kinetic Rain, Assassin, or whatever winds up being the meta, you can do that too once you've got enough currency. It's still October, and that means it's still spooky movie recommendation time, and this time we're going to go with Dawn of the Dead. Both of them, actually. The 1978 George Romero film is a really smart criticism of consumerism and America at a time when people had lost faith in the world around them. And the 2004 remake has zombies that run fast. So they're both good. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and join the Skipping Sleep Studio Discord and become part of our community. And finally, thank you to all of our channel members. If you want to support us and help us make more PoE content, become a channel member or come boost the Discord. Thanks for watching. Bye.